Private first class, Dagoberto Gilb, stationed in Austin, Texas, zip code 78741, born Los Angeles, California, that's land.
Okay, good. Okay, I'm going to be right here.
Okay, so
That's what I'm testing right now.
yeah.
Look at me here,
Uh-huh.
and just give me your eye line. And you're comfortable sitting that way?
Yeah, no, that's what I want to do is just so where I am, I am comfortable where I'm. No, I like this is good. So maybe I'll be looking more like that, but
Well,
that's
here's
fine.
the thing. I want your eye line close to camera. So if you look at me, I'm going to try here, here, and then here.
Okay. Yeah, I'll look at you.
Okay, now let me just test it and play it back because I was recording that. So. All right, so this is an interview with Dagoberto Gilb in Austin, Texas, Thursday, October 28th. And I'm just going to go through the questions.
Sure.
And you can elaborate or not. So you were born and raised in Los Angeles. Your blood father, I understand, was of German extraction, and your mother is Mexican. They divorced when you were quite young, so you grew up with a single parent, your mom. What was it like growing up in LA with a single parent, who was also, I understand, very attractive? And how Mexican was his childhood experience? And if you could incorporate my questions in your answer, since I'm not going to be filming me asking you the question. So,
Oh, I see what you mean.
so when I say, when did you stop robbing banks? You could
Right,
say,
right,
stop
right.
robbing banks.
Right, I get you.
Yeah. So tell me, what was it like growing up with your mom, and how much Mexicanness was in your experience?
Well, my mom, was a. Let me start over.
Don't if you make a mistake or whatever, just start over again. I'm going to be editing.
Right. Growing up with my mom was a lot of my life is based on the fact that I grew up with my mom who drank too much, was very attractive, very gregarious, was always the person that walked in a room and took over, visually, vocally, in every respect. And so growing up with her on that, so there was that aspect. What's interesting about the questions, by the way, is that there's so many ways to answer them, and this is among those questions. I can start here, or I could start here, or I could start there. But my mom, it was strange because there were always men she was always dating, and so I had a life that sort of revolved. We were very close, and so it revolved all around being with her and her world. She was a model, and when I was very young, and some of the things she would take me everywhere when we'd go to her shows, and I still remember this one huge event in my mind. I think it was on La Cienega Boulevard, and she was modeling with about 6, they were always really gorgeous women. And even as a young boy, I think what could I have been, 5, 6? Even then, I knew they were. And, but, it wasn't affected immediately. It's just in the sort of aura of it all. But there was a man there who was tinting the windows at the front. And I went between the odor of him tinting the windows of this kind of very luxurious and very cool clothing store for women where they were doing this show, and the dressing room where my mother and all the women were changing, and I still have that, like a dream, one of the 5 dreams that you fix on in your entire life. You never have forgotten that. Anyway, and that is very much like that as a dream. And I still recall the man. He was very nice to me as he was, painting the window tint. I just was so fascinated. The funny thing is, those are the two ends of my life as I've grown up, being a worker or, doing that and, construction type work. And then the world of my mother, the world of women, which in a lot of respects is just the world of life as we all experience. As far as the Mexican part...
Let me stop you there. Okay, I'm going to come in a little higher. You were saying it's part of...
How Mexican was my house. It's funny, I used to think about this a lot, and especially when I was younger, because I knew in some sense I wasn't like everybody else. In a lot of ways, I just wasn't. I mean, first of all, my mother wasn't like anybody else. My mother, in a lot of ways, beauty is like being gay. It's an exception. It's exceptional. It's different, even as my mother was extremely Mexican and proud of being una mexicana. And she was always, very defensive if anybody said anything, and very proud all the time that she was a Mexicana. But at the same time, it didn't limit her to only being around that. All her friends were just, everybody was her friend. And so I had that kind of in my life of just everybody was something. And it wasn't just uniquely this or that. Now, growing up, I didn't think about it. Until I got older and I started seeing in the Chicano world, I always felt like I wasn't something, because I did feel isolated. Part of that is, pretty much why I became a writer. I mean, part of becoming a writer is that sense of strangeness and the oddness of, you have to have that sense to me, because you are alone a lot. So if you don't have a sense that you're alone at your core, I don't know how you do it. I mean, that is where I come from. So I always felt like a culture of one. And the only culture I knew was the culture of me and my mother.
Well, what about your extended family, your grandma?
Well, it's funny. My mother, being kind of the bad, crazy woman, she burned everybody. She was drinking and partying constantly. And so at the point of I must have been 6 or 7, the closest relatives I had was my uncle. His name was Herb, and my cousins, and on her side, her brother. But at some point, I think the story was that she burned him even, and with credit cards, which was her problem. She burned everybody, and at some point they just were out. And I didn't see any of these people. They were cut out. She was cut off for a good 10 years. And so in that respect, it was just part of my own experience of in a certain sense, it felt deracinated and decultured. We just were ourselves, and whoever she was ended up, dating or marrying. And, I hope to someday write about this. I mean, at one point, in the worst possible fashion, she was chasing Pancho Gonzalez, the tennis star. And all her beautiful friends were chasing various wealthy men because they had access to these different, attractive women who are models. And that was her problem. And so that must have gone on a couple of years. I have too long a story about that. But I learned later that my mother was very much Mexican. I don't think I knew it. Part of the problem that we had is that since she was very much ahead of her time, she was a single, aggressive, had ambition in a certain way. Even if in the 50s, her early 60s, her ambition was to marry. It's very much what the women of the time, I mean, she had jobs, but that's what you did. And she did it well. She got the best. And there were men. She had opportunities. She could do anything she wanted. She could go anywhere. She crossed all the barriers that were around as a Mexican because of her beauty. Her beauty just, was the exception. That door opened. So that was my life as well.
Let me stop you there.
Yeah.
want to make sure that my framing is okay. Lean back.
Lean.
Okay, good. I just don't want. I want to make sure that. Okay. Now lean back right now. Yeah. Okay, that's good. Just want to make sure that you're not leaning out of the frame.
Oh, okay. But if I do, I tend to lean forward. How about if I do that?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll probably move around.
Yeah, okay, that's good. We're good. We're framed in such a way that we can
Good,
do that.
good.
Well, all this experience with your mom and with the various husbands and boyfriends, you have used this to write, obviously, as a resource. And to what degree, when you do that, to what degree is it kind of cathartically working things out, reliving them, reshaping them? And to what degree is it just authors write about what they know and this is what you know, and that was like one of the fundamental things that you kind of go to because you're so familiar with it? Do you get a sense psychologically that you're working something out with it?
Well, it's sort of like many people think that writing is catharsis. And some people think of writing as therapy in a certain sense. I actually don't think that. It might happen as a result, as a consequence, and it probably, in a certain sense, is. I mean, but did Vincent van Gogh paint for therapeutic reasons? No, he painted as he did because he was haunted. He was obsessed. He had demons, and I think, artists and. I'm making the presumption that you'll allow me to say that I'm an artist. I always think that's ridiculous. Like, they're going to laugh at me. Anyway, as an artist, I mean, the whole reason that this happens to you, you get this disease, is that you're haunted. You're driven by the things that are just overbearing. And I call them demons, not as in, sort of the Greek concept of demon, a thing that drives the little voice, a D-A-E-M-O-N. I don't know if it's pronounced differently. It might be Damon, who knows? But anyway, and that is where most, I think, great art comes from, is that haunting, that drive, that thing that you have to get it down. Very much like writing about a dream that you've had, and you have to put it on paper.
So when you finish writing something, is there a sense of fulfillment? I mean, because there's so many of your stories are the archetype of the young boy and the mom and the intervening male figures.
Well, it's funny. Why do I write about my mom? I get that a lot. Do you have a mom issue? And obviously I must, I'm like the person that's constantly peeing in the same corner. No, I don't have a problem. What are you talking about? I just got to pee. It's right there. I didn't even think about it. Because it's close. No, and true, obviously I must have an issue, and probably a good therapist or a good psycho-literary historian will just discuss my issues, which are plenty. I hope they don't limit themselves to that one. But anyway, the other truth is that my mother is a treasure trove of stories. I mean, it's very hard when you have a chest over there and you open it up and there's all these golden coins and you think, oh God, I just need that. And so a lot of ways, it isn't just that I'm psychologically obsessed and, the fact is it's pretty hard. I did only have my mother, and men were these objects of my mother. And so, yeah, I did have a pattern. If you teach a dog to always turn left when he sees a door or something, I suppose the dog always learns to do that. And Pavlovian and in the Skinnerian sense, I must have that. But again, I just find this a constant. I went through this story that I wrote that just was published recently, Uncle Rock. And it's about a boy and a mother. And the truth is, that story comes from the simple, real phenomena that we were at a Dodger game when I was young. My mother was with this man she was dating. I was getting autographs. It happened to be the Yankees that I was getting autographs. And one of the Yankees sent me a note asking, with his I actually, I thought about this. It's one of those like, it's so traumatic and exciting at the same time. I didn't know what to do. Of course, when you get to write it, you get to do better. You get to do it again, but better. Obviously, I didn't do this. I didn't know what the hell to do. On the one hand, I was extremely excited that a Yankee wanted to, hang out with my mom. But on the other hand, I wasn't so stupid, didn't know what he had in mind, and I was pissed. So, and so that's the story. Now, how can I resist that? Now, is that because I've been so traumatized by my mother, or is that because that's a hell of a good thing to work with, to come off of? I actually think the latter.
You have a diversity of male figures in your works. To what degree? I know that a lot of them is based on your personal experiences at the construction site, but to what degree are some of the older male figures like in Flowers, Cloyd, and Uncle Rock, these different men? To what degree are they shaped by some of the observations you made with the actual men? Was there a diversity of men?
There was a diversity of men, but yeah, I am one of these people that does not work from my imagination. I don't invent characters and don't invent places, and I don't know how to. I have no talent for that. My talent is to take a chunk of a broken glass or a broken figurine and see something and say, oh, I think I'll put all these other parts around it and rebuild, reshape. So it looks like, in a way it's like a mosaic, and once I put it all together and like, or better put like a rock wall, and I put all these rocks in, then from a distance it looks like, wow, he did a great wall, and it looks like one wall, and it's really 1,000 little pieces of rock that I fit and chiseled in here and nicked and that and the other like that. So
okay, let me stop you right there, and I'm going to just play back a little bit just to make sure that it's all sticking. I have this wonderful experience that
yeah, I can imagine. Tantamount to. I didn't know what the hell they were talking about. Like, what is tantamount to? Why did they do that?
okay.
I have to talk to the black guy in the class. Hey man, you know what the hell they're talking about? I no clue. No, brother, I got no idea. Okay, good, we're together.
It's good. Getting a nice lighting on you. Okay, let's talk about the James D. Phelan.
He's the ex-mayor of San
Francisco, right? I Googled the San Francisco Foundation and found out. I was trying to get the year on that. That was 85?
I think 84 maybe even.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
Well, anyway, tell me about that. But by this time, had you been submitting stories for publication? Had you been published?
When I won the Phelan Award, I had actually published like 3 stories. And maybe 2 of them were in the most prominent magazine in San Francisco called the Three Penny Review. And I think that had a lot to do with me winning.
Let me stop you just there. What's that noise? Say something?
I won the Phelan Award right after I started publishing in the Three Penny Review, which is one of the better magazines in the country and certainly one of the more literary magazines coming out of the Bay Area.
Okay, we're good.
Is it my refrigerator going? Or is it the...
But you know what? I'm so
Or
close.
is that the guy backing, that truck backing up?
We're fine. I just listened to it and stuff. I'm sorry. Go ahead. The Phelan Award.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, no, when I won the Phelan Award, I'd published a few. My first publication, by the way, was, my very first publication was in a magazine in Las Cruces, New Mexico called Puerto del Sol. And then I had to publish in Nuestro, the magazine out of Washington, D.C., which was, as far as I know, the first Latino magazine ever that had a wide, it was sort of trying to be an Esquire. And they published a story of mine. And then the Three Penny Review, which was one of the more not only prestigious literary magazines in the Bay Area, which it was also one of the more prestigious magazines in the country, one of the really young, new magazines out of Berkeley. So I won that probably because of that, because the crowd in San Francisco read it, and appreciated that. So I got that on the basis of that. It was really good because, I was this construction worker at the time, mailing things at 6 o'clock, 5:30 in the morning, dropping things off in the mailbox on my way to work. And, I didn't know anything. I just mailed to the ends of the earth. I didn't know one magazine from another. I just sat and didn't mind rejection. I always tell people, hell, my mother used to reject me. How the hell would I worry about that? Anyway, and it just turned out that the Bay Area was where fiction was being published, so I won the Native California Prize.
What did that do to your sense of yourself as a writer, and also what did it do to your writing career?
It was a great moment. One of the greatest moments. I have wonderful memories. I have about 10 of these absolutely wonderful that I can die happy because I got to experience this. I was working in a hole. It was Mocha. I had half of the parking structure. We were probably down 3 down, and I was kind of a monster. I would do. They had two guys on the right side, 2 pairs of guys, but on the left side was me and some apprentice. I could do that, and I was a monster. And I had just won the prize, and there were all these people taking pictures above because it was Mocha, and I knew it was cool, but I actually I didn't realize how cool it was until later. And but I remember I had just won the prize, and I was, busting, doing shit, and then suddenly I look up, and there was a Japanese man with a beautiful camera at some distance, leaning over the barricade, and leaning against the wooden slat and going, taking pictures of me. And I looked up at him, and there was a bead of sweat right on the tip of my nose, about to fall. And I thought to myself, you dumb fucker, you don't even know you're taking a picture of a great writer. You think it's just some dumb monkey construction worker, and I'm a big fat writer. And so that was wonderful. So in that sense, I felt so excited that this had happened to me. And I remember meeting this Berkeley professor of English, which was pretty impressive to me. I was like going to Paris, telling me that all these things would open up to me. The fact that none of that happened, I never knew why. Nobody ever wrote me and asked me if I wanted a book published, except my friend, the guy I had met years before in El Paso, Texas, a poet named Bobby Bird. And they wanted to start a press, and they were debating about it, him and his wife. And once I won the prize, I said, hey, can we start the press with your work? And I said, yeah.
And that was the collection.
It was called Winners on the Pathline, yeah.
And was that one of the stories in the collection? The winner story?
Oh yeah, the Winners on the Pathline story, yes, absolutely.
So you do 1985, you do Winners on the Pathline, and then 9 years pass before...
10, I think.
Yeah, before The Magic of Blood. So what was going on during that 10-year period?
Banging nails and thinking it was crazy. At the point of, 10 years later, I'm getting nothing. I'm publishing a lot, and in a certain sense, I was winning prizes and, doing things. Things were happening. I've published a lot, but nobody wanted to publish a book. I remember Wendy Lesser, the editor at the Three Penny Review, had done everything she could, and I had a book where I crossed out, I'd submit stories to magazines, I'd write the name. But at some point I had 2 manuscripts of stories and a novel. Not even the first novel anymore, the second novel, which was the Mickey Acuna novel. I wrote that. Still no book. And so at some point I wanted to give up. I thought, well, this is it. I've done it. I have kids, and they point to their mouth, and they point to their shoes. They need new shoes because they come every 6 months. They've outgrown them. And I realized, I guess I lose. This is ridiculous. I can't put my family through this. I can't do it myself. And in some sense, what I would call a literary suicide. I said, that's it, I quit. My dream had been to publish like Melville and Harper and Row. I couldn't believe I couldn't get a book like Melville. Maybe I'd be mediocre, less good, but why not? I'm not getting tenure. I don't need, whatever. I want a book. If it's not going to be, well, at some point I said, well, I'm giving up. And I dug through my archives and looked at smaller presses that had queried me. One of them was the University of New Mexico Press. And that's when I just one day said, that's it, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'd been rejected by the heads of everybody else. I sent a woman, a Chicana from the UNM Press. Within a week, she was offering me, money, which for a university press was unheard of. And then I thought about it and said, hell, I'll give you both collections. Let me get rid of all this. I'm done.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because there's 26 short stories in that collection.
Well, there's probably 40.
I mean, my first collection, I was struggling to get 8 stories together.
I had 40 stories. And I had published 35 stories. I was just, but we cut them out. Some of them probably aren't good. And plus, it was just too much. But I gave them the second collection, just saying, what the hell with it? Let's just be done with this whole business. So as I was I imagine I'm jumping off, hell with it. I'm on a high rise. I'm done. I just jump. And as I'm falling, things started happening. And when I landed in D.C. I landed in New York. I found myself in Boston, places I'd never been. I had, my first trip was to New York City. They put me up on Park Avenue. I'm like, I used to joke with people, what do I need to go to New York for, man? I'm from L.A. I don't need to go to New York.
So Magic of Blood won the Penn Hemingway Award.
Which is the first book prize for the nation. It's the first book. It's like the Rookie of the Year prize. And
tell me, how did you find out about winning, and what were you thinking? How did you feel?
It was a shocker. Actually, the funny thing is that the first news, actually, just step back because, I actually think it's good to know. UNM Press told me they're going to submit my book into all these prizes. And they said, give us a list of prizes that we want to submit to. And the only one I thought I had even a minuscule bit of chance was the Texas Institute of Letters Prize for the best book of fiction of the year. So I wanted that, but then I looked it up and I didn't know about prizes, and I listed like 4 others. And I sent them in. But again, I really wanted this Texas Institute of Letters Prize. I thought I should get a shot. It was $6,000 too, and I thought I had a shot. And so right around the end of December, I knew that the deadline was the 31st of December. I called the president of the Texas Institute of Letters and said, hey, I want to make sure the books got there. Can you tell me, can I contact the judge? And he said, yeah. And he said, well, look, just go, write this person and see if they got your book. They didn't. UNM Press was on break. I was furious, upset. So I got my own copies. I put them in the mail, and then I decided to see if they did. I didn't even know about the other prizes, and I would have never known. I decided one being the Penn Hemingway, another being the Penn Faulkner. I actually thought they should enter the National Book Award just for the hell of it. I mean, you got it, you might as well try. But that costs $100, and I couldn't do that myself. A writer can't submit his own books. But the other 2, you could. So the Penn Hemingway, they weren't around. And somebody at the Penn Faulkner, I call, can you check for me whether my book is there? It wasn't. They had lied to me. So I, right then, took about a dozen books, mailed them myself. First news I got, I was a finalist for the Penn Faulkner. I was a finalist with Philip Roth. And the winner the year before was Annie Proulx. So I still have a picture of Annie Proulx and Philip Roth. They're looking all literary. I have a big shit-eating grin. I'm so like, look at this. This is crazy. Anyway, I learned that I'm a finalist for that. And as I learn, I get I get a call. I'm teaching at Wyoming at this point, and I get a call. A person named Annie Proulx wants to talk to you. I didn't know Annie, and I really didn't know her work. And what the heck is this? This is weird. And I called her, and she told me I won the Hemingway Award. And then I found out who she was. She wasn't. She had just won the Penn Faulkner for postcards, and then.
So did they have her call just out of courtesy?
She was the chair of the committee that picked the Penn Hemingway. So she became an instant friend and an advocate, because frankly, it's so random how these things work. Had there been another year without an Annie Proulx, I'm certain I wouldn't even have made the last final lump of. But Annie is so quirky and weird, and of course a genius. And that does help that she's very smart. She picked me.
Let's talk about the magic of blood. I guess what I walk away from it, because I think the whole notion of magic is we see it a lot in your work, and I do think that there's what I like about that story is the fact that this rumor of greatness that runs in our blood winds up empowering people, and it makes a huge difference, and yet and at the end you pay it off with, in fact, it wasn't a rumor, it was reality, but even so, had you not paid it off, I'm fascinated by the concept that the mere sense of magic in our lives can empower us. Tell me about that.
Well, the magic of blood, a lot of people, it's very much like I was telling you, in the sense that all my stories come from something. It is a metaphor, like you were saying, of the magic that is in our blood. And it is also the magic of our blood. And in my case, I told you my father was probably bitter about losing my mother, just treating him so poorly. But I had a great aunt who was essentially my mother's mother. My grandmother died of cancer when my mother was in her teens or younger. And anyway, and they followed, my grandmother had followed her sister. And her sister, the rumor was an opera singer who had been in Hollywood. My father, I knew nothing because my mother was cut off from everything, right? My father would say, she's just a Mexican. And I'm like, God, I don't know who to believe. My mother is like crazy herself, and she could, be lying or getting it wrong. And my father is bitter and nasty. I don't know who to believe. And at the point that I actually met my great aunt, her name is Raquel Nieto, she actually opened the Greek Theater in Los Angeles. She was the first opera singer from Mexico. She was the first opera singer ever to appear on the radio. She was from Mexico. And she had this fabulous story, had married oddly and ironically, no relationship to me studying French, but a French director, and lived in LA and Hollywood. And, all my other uncles, my mother's brothers, they all hung out, knew her, and had to connect to her, but of course we were so cut off. So I got to go revisit that story, and I still have all the newspaper clips, and I heard her story of how she came from, they lived in first Jalapa, then Puebla, and then went to Mexico City, and she told the story of her parents. I got all the whole story, and it was really like So my father is full of shit. Thank you. My mother isn't. She's a wild lady. She drinks too much, but she didn't lie.
Let me stop you just a second. I'm going to open it up a little bit. Okay. This thing that I told you about, my assessing you as a method writer.
Oh, that's brilliant.
You know, because I look at, you know, what does a method actor do? Well, a method actor is taught to go into his emotional memory and relive moments and have that inform the character that he's portraying. And you know, the thing I always, when I first started directing, I was always looking at the outside, and I would say to it, you know, can you smile more? Or can you look meaner or something?
Right.
And you know, you quickly learn, if you're dealing with any actor of any quality, is that's the wrong thing to do. It's like, what you do is you feed the inner. And if you do a good job of feeding the inner, the outward will take care of itself. And it'll be authentic. It won't be, you know, a smile because this is a moment that calls for a smile. If you feed the right inner of that actor may go deep inside of his emotional memory and come up with not a smile, and he may just have a straight face, and that may be more authentic and real to the situation than anything else. I think your writing is very similar to that. Tell me about how do you go about getting at what your character's inner life is like.
You know, comparing what I do to method acting, I actually think that's brilliant, and it's so brilliant and insightful that I'm not sure I can answer it without a little more, like maybe a month of like going around in my head. However, it's interesting what you do catch in the way that I immediately can respond to. I almost always am writing in the first person because I want to be inside. You know, I joke and, you know, I often say, well, the reason I have to be first person because, you know, I can be first person stupid, and if he says something wrong, or if I do, you know, it's like, yeah, he's a dumb guy. You know, whereas if I'm omniscient and he gets something wrong, what kind of omniscient is that? So I skip that. But I work very hard, and, you know, it's interesting when I pick things when you know, in this business, a lot of it's public. You have to do public readings. And not all stories, I feel, have my voice. Because I'll inhabit another voice. A voice that's not how I hear me. I hear a voice, and I try to capture that voice. I try to make that voice, I put it on paper and transcribe the voice I'm hearing. And so I have a few friends. One of my closest, you know, it's like a brother from El Paso is me. He grew up in El Paso, I grew up in LA, but he's my brother. We're twins. And a guy named Danny. And Danny, I often would like, I'm gonna let Danny take this part and he's gonna be this guy. And I'm not Danny. Danny's far worse than me. and it's interesting that you would point out, because yes, that's exactly what I do. I try to, it's interesting. I care about voice, and that's the main thrust of my fiction. All my work is about capturing the voice of a person. And voice, yeah, it's the immediate sound, the tenor, the tone, but it's in the large sense of voice, of the voice of that people, and all the voice and all the layers of that.
Well, and sometimes, I mean, again, going back to how there's the outward manifestation, which I would call the text. In acting, you know, there's the words as they're written, and then there's the subtext of what the words really mean. And depending on the situation and the scene, the two actors can say exactly the same, you know, words, and they can mean completely different things depending on how the actor plays it. In your stories, I'm thinking there's a lot of subtext going on. I'm thinking of Alan Phoenix and what were the other ones? Where the Sun Don't Shine, The Rat. You know, The Rat, well, in Phoenix, here's a guy who appears on the outside, the text, to be brass and mean and fuck you, and yet inside he's driven by this mad compulsion to do this job right.
Right.
And he's really struggling. And if you don't know that, then the outward is completely a different read than what's really going on inside. In The Rat, the voice of the character is really obsessing about this rat, but it's really about what's going on in his life with his
Right.
wife and his kids. And why does he send them off? Well, it's because of the rat. No, it isn't. There's other things going on that he's not dealing with himself. So tell me about how you deal with this text and subtext in terms of your characterizations.
Well, it's funny. How do you put the subtext? In a way, text and subtext is like shadow and light. And sometimes it's what you don't say. What you don't put in is what you're putting in. It's more important what you don't say and how you don't say and how you don't have people do too much, that you're saying more of what you mean to do and say. And that is, the gift and the talent that you work at, that's the craft, probably the most important craft. It's particularly important with dialogue. I mean, it's easier to discuss it. I mean, it's true, it's a character's voice, because one of the things that a writer has to remember is that this writer isn't telling the truth, the factual details. You're telling a large truth. And in telling that larger truth with that other kind of truth that we care about, it's by omitting things and by him being wrong. It's about what he doesn't say. What he says wrong tells you more about the truth than his being factually true. It's his untruths that tell you the truth about his character. It's the amount of things he leaves out, the exaggerations. It's all those other things that discuss. When somebody's selling you something, you don't necessarily know it's a good product. You know that it's a good or bad product by what the person doesn't mean to tell you. And that's what you're paying attention to. And that, when you're creating a piece, is what you should be doing, is remembering, I want to tell them, don't buy this. So I'm going to write, you better buy this. And I'm going to do it in such a classy way that the whole story might appear to be this, but when you get to the end, it's like, I'm not going to buy that. And I would say, exactly.
Great. Now, you divided The Magic in Blood into 3 sections. Did that correspond to the previous collections, or was there some rationale?
No, and to a certain extent, it was just more arbitrary. The division of the book was, one was to be, the middle section was respectful to the winners of the Pathline chapbook. Those stories were interspersed. Basically, there was a newer collection and an older collection. The older collection had the winners of the Pathline, but with the chapbook, I knew that in some sense it was a sensitive subject to be republishing in this full book the winners on the Pathline, and I wanted it there separately so that that book would have some integrity, the chapbook that Cinco Puntos was doing.
Well, that second section, though, I just not knowing this, when I looked at it, the thing that jumped out at me was that it really is a section of stories about winners and losers. And there is, of course, the Pathline story, but there's so many of them dealing with people beset by hard times and the choices they make, and sometimes they win and sometimes they lose. Sometimes people are working against their best interest. What do you think makes for winners and losers in life? You've seen a lot of it, and a lot of your characters do that. What's their driving motivation? What is the difference between this person being a winner or winning in this situation, this one losing?
Why winners and why losers in my stories? I hadn't thought about it. I think it's a good insight into what I'm doing, because I don't know if I'd put it that way. It reminds me of a question I remember, as you do these Q&As after big readings, and in the back, you get a hand and a kid will say, Mr. Gilb, how come you never write about rich people? You know? And I want to say, it's because I've been trying for a long time. If you buy more books, I swear to God, I will write about rich people. I have been wanting to do that. And I really, I think it really comes down to those are the people that I encounter. Those are the characters that I've had the most contact with. And in the ordinary world of ordinary common people. And in many respects, Chicanos are the most ordinary. We're the most American of all people now, as we become more and more what remains of the working class in this country, what used to be, reveled about in the 30s. And, Mexicanos have been going through the Great Depression for 150 years. So we know about the Great Depression. It's called Every Day. And so we know about how it is, and it's very much like living through the Great Depression. We do have these success stories, but success is defined differently even than what, they might call success. Because our successes are like about life. I mean, we are going to all die, so we all have that loss. It's just how we are going to deal with it and at the level we can. So I can't avoid. It's been my life. I've had some great joys and I've had some great sorrows, and I sort of reflect the world that I live in.
And part of this is this relativity, which also runs throughout your stories. I'm thinking of La Señora, and you have this rich woman, and the kind of, she's obsessed by certain things, and the irony of it is one looks at her through the eyes of this working class guys who are just trying to make $1 out of 99 cents. And you get this great insight into this relative, it's the same universe, the same world that these guys are living in, but boy, is it different.
Well, it's fun. I'm glad I love that you said that, that you're noticing that I'm telling the story. Usually that story of the Señora is from the point of view of the Señora. And where did that come from, actually? Where did that story come from? That story came from, in fact, I lived in a building with a rich lady in El Paso, and and it was, I have all that information where in fact she died, but of course not with a rose on a carpet. That carpet was something that when I was very small, my mother had in the house, and that carpet stuck in my mind with a rose and I liked that Faulkner story, A Rose for Emily. And I decided to have a rose for Emily, which was also like Psycho, in some sense, the bed, that sort of thing. So all these little things move into it. But I had just read Stones for Ibarra by Harriet Dewar. And here it was where this woman, this white woman, knew everything about the Mexicanos. She knew all their thoughts, and of course they didn't know her thoughts, because she knew everything and they don't. And I at the time had been writing, and I'm like, oh, so if I wrote from the point of view of the taxi driver who she writes about, if I wrote the story from his point of view about her, they wouldn't publish that. They wouldn't like that story. They wouldn't want to hear his voice. But they liked the rich lady that moved to Mexico and discuss, aren't these Mexican people so interesting? And she's 80 years old, and she's writing about all these Mexican people, and shouldn't you read this book? And I'm like, no, I should not. And goddamn it, who are you to tell me I should read that book? And why do I have to talk about her? I don't care about her. She's the one that's making obstacles for me. She has the money. I'd like to live in that house. And so I decided, well, wait, let's just talk about the end of that era, which is what I believe in. I believe that era ends. That at some point, the people living in her house, yes, we have had that history. And that, yes, we did have, but you're going to hear me say that, and that'll end that era. Because then suddenly, it's not my opinion, I'm right. It isn't me being right, it's just, that's the fact. And I know that you'll think, you wouldn't publish 8 or 9 of the characters in her book, you only publish her. Well, I'm saying, no. You're going to start publishing the taxi driver, the carpenter. You're going to publish the guy that owns the you know, the various stores in wherever the little town that she lived in, I've forgotten. And that's what that story was. It's like, hey, I'm going to tell you the story about the chicharras. The moment when she dies, there's this huge sound of nature.
Another thing that we find in your characters is their incredible ability to deceive themselves. And again, voice has a lot to do with this because we hear the voice and we hear the outward manifestations. I'm thinking of, Dance with the Prettiest Girl, where the protagonist is going on and on and on about how much he loves this woman, except he's leaving, he's walking away from her. And we certainly see it in Winners in the Pathline, in The Rat, Something Foolish. Something Foolish really got to me because he hears his father who really wants to have a private moment with his son and is inventing reasons why he must do it because he's so hung up that he can't reach out. And I know that experience, so that made a big impression on me. But anyway, do you look for self-deception in your characters, or does it just present itself? And what does this self-deception say about ourselves? Is it a saving grace? Is it a necessary evil? Is it something that we can't get away from? Is it something we should embrace?
Yeah, I do use what you're calling self-deception quite a bit. It's working with.
Let me hold the thought for 1 minute because this is an important one. I want to make sure it's just a little bit tighter.
I do work with what you're calling self-deception quite a bit. I think what I call it is like is sort of an unreliable narrator. But again, it's because I'm not trying to tell you, it's fiction, and I have other truths. Factuality has nothing to do with the truth I'm going for, so I have to meander in weird places. But we do know, and it's not necessarily that somebody is lying, although liars are interesting. Sometimes we just are at different stages. When we're young, we believed in Santa Claus. And you wonder, well, why did they lie to us? And in a certain sense, what lesson did you learn? That, well, it's kind of nice when you're young to protect them in this fantasy. In a certain sense, it's one of the lessons in life, in a way, of what you're learning, the value of treating children well, like letting them have childhood, so that not everything has to be so dark and real and stark. It's kind of nice to be in a womb, safe. And so, how many times do you know people that I'm going to be the greatest ball player? And you can, especially as you get older and you're at that same age, it's like, God, I hope that doesn't happen. I hate that fucker. I don't want him to do it. And but if somebody was older and they could say, look, I've watched 1,000 people. This isn't how you make it. It's not going to happen. But the 2 or 3 people at the time don't know it. Well, as a writer, you get the perspective of, like, I'm going to tell you the story. Remember that guy? Here's this guy. Here's his point of view. And it's life. We have to learn all these things. We have to learn about the liars. We have to learn about the people that really believed that, and they weren't lying. They were just dumb or naive or overly hopeful. I mean, it isn't impossible that we can become millionaires. I mean, the Republicans live on the dream, the real possibility that 1 in 10,000 or 1 in 100,000 of us will become now billionaires. They live on that. They give us that fantasy like great candy, like chocolate here, and we buy it. The fact that what Union did is said, that is not going to happen. I mean, yeah, okay, let's give it 10,000, let's give it 1,000. Is that how we're going to run and when we lose, like 900 of us have to be in poverty? No, let's collect. So we learn these things. But we do have to hear the stories of the losers. It's nice to hear the winner stories, but when we grow up, part of growing up and maturing is to learn, oh, I made this mistake, I believed this. I believed in this. Well, it wasn't so bad that I believed in it, but it's really good that I don't anymore. And so I think it's important in the flowers, part of it is the kid, in a certain sense, like all of us, even though he's supposedly, Sonny is 15. I don't think Sonny is 15. I wrote that as a mature man in his 50s. Sonny isn't 15. It's a metaphor of innocence, being at the verge of manhood and childhood. We all are 15 in us. That's what I was writing about. And it's easier to discuss these things. So I have him doing these things. He lies to himself. You know how you even with your own checkbook or something, or oh, I'm going to pay this, and then that'll do that. You do these things so you can get on, and in a lot of ways we have to survive.
Your next book after Magic of Blood was The Last Known Residence of Mickey Acuna. And again, this goes into this whole notion of what is plot. Because for the longest time, at first when I first read it, I thought, no one writes to the Colonel, and what's he going to do with it? and then I realized that was, that wasn't what it was about. At the end, if you've really been paying close attention, I think you discover, and tell me if I'm wrong, but you discover that Mickey is probably a psycho and probably ex-con, and when the guy with the beret shows up, it's probably someone he met in the joint, and that all of a sudden he's so tired of that old man going up and down the steps that he snuffs him, and that he gets back at the guy who fires him, and he does it with this blasé self-deception or hiding it from himself, and he's a winner in that sense. He walks away from it and no one knows. That's brilliant. And I thought, wow. And it's only though some people will still read it and say, well, nothing happened. Then he left. So tell me about that. I mean, what?
Well, in a lot of ways, it is sort of the essence of how I write and what you're describing. I don't feel like, in a certain sense, I'm trying to capture. Like again, I'm an investigative journalist who's writing about these things, the literary investigative journalist, and I'm putting this stuff together. But again, I work off the image first. And what is the large metaphor here that I'm working out of? I'm at the border. The characters are literally at the border. We're at the Texas-Mexican border, and every character is at the border. There's a border of reality and not reality. That's the whole play of the entire book, is like, what's really happening? What does he think is happening? When does that turn into the other? How do you know when is what and what is this? And of course, my major thing, plot aside, is to let you realize what it's like, it's sort of the middle class of the down and out. It's like you're living in Hawaii, what's next is the corner, And, I lived in Hawaii. I know that situation. I had some trouble and I was trapped. And it is a version of like losing your mind, and you hear all these stories and you don't know if that really calm guy is an axe murderer or just a feeble old weirdo. You don't know at some point what you think, and then suddenly one day you think, oh my God, he said something really weird. And, isn't that what all weird perverts, they always sound, everything becomes suspect, every action. And so Mickey, the main character, is immediately that guy. I focus on a guy who, I would say, look, my main thing is that you had those questions. That is what you got my novel. I'm not going to say I know what the answer is, because I'm kind of like a reader in that sense too. I'm reporting on what here's the report I had about when, this is the why thing in my version. I've done the best I can. I call it fiction. We don't publish this in the newspaper or in a magazine, but I'm telling you what it's like, and this is the best I can do. And And I think when people, the things that people don't like about the book, I say that's exactly right. You just don't realize that's what I mean. And you don't like it, but that's because, some people, I mean, I understand there's a huge number of people who don't like that book, but I don't like the vast majority of the very people that don't like a Mickey book, I don't like the vast majority of what they like. Because I find it so obvious what their plots, and then it's like, okay, it's going to either be this or this. I mean, I just don't want to read that. I'd rather watch the TV show version, which I expect to have one of two endings, and that's it.
Okay, let me stop and do a little bit more. But started in the fall, I would think. Started in the spring, and then you can go into the summer, and summer nights are nice for
Oh, yeah, that's exactly true.
But now you're going to hit, film 3 or 4 is going to be in December, January.
Well, I think it's a good idea. I don't know how San Antonio is so hard to predict anything. I don't know.
Let's go on to, I'm going to hold on woodcuts, because you're talking now about the journalism, and your Gritos is this collection of essays, and here we see another part of you, which is the reporter, the essayist, and one of the things that we've talked about, I hadn't known about the Juarez stuff, but I remember when the series came out, Benjamin Brandt and all that, and I was actually at the other end of it, because I was trying to get a gig directing it.
Oh, wow.
And of course they were like, well, if it goes to series, maybe we'll consider you blah, blah, blah. I was at that point, I didn't have too many credits, so there was. But anyway, and this whole experience that you had with how they diss you, basically, is so common to me.
Huh.
But somehow we never seem to make the grade. And the thing that you've talked about, that we've talked about, is how, in many ways, we're always having to start over. We're never taken for real. And could you just say a little bit about how Chicanos have to, in many ways, prove themselves over and over again, and how even when we achieve certain levels of artistic merit, it somehow is not enough when compared to the American mainstream, and that is because of an American mainstream, stereotype that we don't fit into.
Yeah, I never understand why we're not enough, but in some sense, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that we're not enough because we can't get enough to be enough. I mean, once we start off in a weaker position, we look weaker. We're always in the hole in the beginning, and then when we finally get to this point, they're up here, and it's like, well, how do I ever get there then? It's like housing prices. You live in El Paso and you bought a house for 40, and hey, it's worth double. It's worth 80, and in LA it went up to 500,000. It's very difficult for us to ever break in. The experience with that the TV show Juarez, it sounded good, but I'd had some earlier life experiences, and I will not deny that I can cop attitude too. And I'm sensitive to that because I had a lot of it, but it just struck me as like, in some sense, I was, it wasn't like we could deal with each other as professionals, like I'm a carpenter, I'm a journeyman, and you're going to hire me. And, obviously if you're the super, I respect that, but, just respect me as a journeyman. But I had the sense that I was supposed to light their cigar. And I'm like, I'm not going to light your cigar, man. That is not going to happen. I don't care if you smoke Cuban cigars that I can't buy, but you're not going to make me light them too. And that was the sense that I had, like, aren't you honored that you get to be here? All you have to do is light this cigar, big deal. No, I guess maybe it isn't. It's only one match, but I can't do that shit, man. Sorry.
So let me ask you a broader question. When do you think, we've had this generation, the first generation of Chicano and Latino literary writers in America, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Chicano, that have made an imprint, and yet many of them still have not achieved the kind of recognition that one sees from other ethnic backgrounds. I'm thinking Irish, I'm thinking African American. I mean, when you look at the time between the Harlem Renaissance and the posting of people like James Baldwin as the canon, when do we become the canon?
God, when do we become the canon has been something I have been obsessing on in the last 10 years, because as I took a job in academia teaching, and the more I've been around it, the more I'm sort of mystified by how it works, because truly, I'm talking me, and in some sense it's not me, I mean me as metaphor. I have done as much as them. But, I have an example. This is the difference. That it seems so strange to me, and it's awkward to even say this, but it is a curious thing. One time I was giving a reading, and it was a friend who asked me, and he negotiated my fee. And, down, of course. And I went to it. It was fine. But then when I was there, I happened to know there was another person reading too, who was getting considerably more. And I said, hey, look, I'm just curious, but why are you paying this much more for this guy? And this friend looked at me and said, he won the Penn Hemingway Award. And the guy had won the Penn Hemingway Award years before me. And I said, but I won the Penn Hemingway Award. Actually, not only had I won the Penn Hemingway, I'd won like 3 or 4 awards that superseded this guy, other guy that he's paying more. But what was the consequence? My attitude. I was the problem for saying so. And I could see it in a certain sense, but I'm like, oh, that is just, what am I supposed to do? Either I lose, either way I go. And that's the situation that I find myself in, and I find myself not as me only, but as us. This is what we're constantly doing, and I have no idea how we overcome it. I find it is, for me, at this current moment, the most mysterious thing I'm dealing with now is how the hell do we get them to pay attention to us in a way that's equitable and fair. And I don't understand why we aren't seeing, why in the Southwest, which is just like the Southeast, where the binary of black and white, everybody knows there's blacks and everybody knows there's white. And they know the culture is an intermix of black and white, that binary. Well, you flip that over, you talk about the Southwest, that's a binary of brown and white, and yet they love our furniture, they love our architecture, they love the names of our mountains, they love the Rio Grande, they love all our food, and they don't see us. They take pictures and they say, let's take that shirt. They don't see there's a body inside of it. It is just a phenomena that I haven't figured out, and I'm totally obsessing on that. I'm going to work it out. I don't know what it is.
in Gritos, you mentioned the works of Rolando Hinojosa, Ricardo Sanchez, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Who do you consider your literary influences? And it doesn't, not Latino, but just in general, what writers do you think have influenced how you write?
My literary influences, I always love that question because of the time I live in. I generally like to think of every Nobel Prize winner there is, and all the greatest writers from Beckett to Ionescu to Dostoevsky to Tolstoy to, I'll bring up Lao Tzu and hey, Plato. And then, if I can get a name in a Google search and somebody looks up Dostoevsky or Plato and my name are nearby, I did it. So, but I don't know, it's very difficult. I was thinking about a story, when I wrote a particular story that I get some sort of what I consider classist bullshit about me being a macho, which is just nonsense. And I think, well, what did I write this story that they're accusing of being macho? You know, which I know it has nothing to do with that. And then I think back, who was I reading? Well, you know, I was reading B. Traven. I was reading Juan Rulfo. I was reading Raymond Carver. I read Anton Chekhov. If you want to read stories, read Chekhov. You know, the people that I cared about, you know, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy. I even read some, you know, a few of the Germans. Camus. I love Camus. I went through a Camus period. And you know, maybe Kerouac, to the sense that, like I said earlier, that there is a voice, that you can write with voice. That was huge for me. Just to stick on that for a really quick second, I think it's really important. I would read lit, and I wasn't a reader. And I think, God, these people I don't understand literature. I don't understand why people read Thomas Hardy. What the hell is Tess of the what? D'Urberville? What is that shit? Why would you read that? And then I realized what it was, is that they were rich people. They talked like rich people. They had a voice like I never heard people like this talk. I have trouble understanding what they're talking about. It's because they're talking about things. I've never been in a house with rich things like them. And so I tend to have to look things up. It was only until I started reading like Nelson Algren, people that were from the streets, from the place, you know, John Fonte is another great guy. I mean, he's kind of an asshole to Mexicanos. I don't really love that book for that reason, but I do love him as a character. I love how he came to writing, because he's a real guy.
Okay. Did you? I wanted to go back now to woodcuts of women, because you mentioned this whole thing about you know, being stereotyped and stuff, and so this, you know, this is 2001 when the book comes out, and you've already gotten criticism, you know, for the magic of blood and being a macho and all that. So what would possibly possess you to take this front on and do this book that is so full of sexuality and all of that? Answer that one first.
No, why woodcuts, given that, you know, even the magic of blood in our community was like, you know, in our current, I actually think our historical community, I think it's about a historical moment that we're living through. Our historical community right now, you know, it's like, what is it with this with only men? And my answer is, well, I mean, I don't know how many construction sites you've been at, but I'm sorry, it's not my decision, you know. It was just the reality of what I know. But why woodcuts? You know, it's funny because as they accuse me of, you know, writing only about men and I only know about being a man and blah, 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 it's like, well, as a matter of fact, if my life is probably 75% women. I know much more about women. I've hung around, and I don't mean sexually in terms of lovers. I mean, growing up in every respect, I knew much less about men. I was always really uncomfortable. I am much more comfortable with women now as friends, as people to be intimate intellectually with, than I am with men, because I grew up knowing how women talk. I probably talk in the same way. I move in that direction with women. And so I know, I wrote a story that the New Yorker published called I Knew She Was Beautiful. It's about my mom. And in a lot of respects, it was my way of saying, look, you guys think that my story is about, like this, like I'm a misogynist Hemingway guy, because you the first time you heard the Hemingway, you assume it has to do with Hemingway, and I must be a Hemingway neophyte or whatever. And it's like, it has nothing to do. I don't even like Hemingway. I don't even know his stuff. It has to do with the title. Well, here's the story of me and my mother. This is who, if I'm macho, like you don't like, it's because that's how my mother raised me. That's her world. I am her child. I am her experience actualized, grown up as a man. My mother loved me. I mean, she whacked me a lot, but she loved me as a male. So woodcuts of women, there's another thing I did, and it was willful. Men buy beer, women buy books. And at the same time, you know, when The Magic of Blood came out, the one story that invariably women that would come up and say, I really liked your book, most of the time women, you know, my father is a carpenter, my father is a cop, my father is in the industry. So proud I got this book for him, he loved it. I love that. But when the women would say, I really loved, the men, you know, it's really the interesting thing is really the first 7 or 8 stories. That's the only thing they read. But the men would talk one of those 7 or 8 stories in the beginning. Women would always talk about the story called Nancy Flores. That would be the only one they'd hear from them. And I realized, oh, women like stories about women, which sounds natural. It doesn't sound. So I decided I'm going to write a book that sells. I'll do my own stuff, but why not focus on Nancy Flores type stories? And it worked. Women would buy that book 3 or 4 at a time. It totally succeeded. But, you know, people tell me, you write from the point of view of a man. Yeah, but I write from the point of view of a man knowing, loving, caring, everything. This is the stuff I know about women. I'm being honest. And one other thing that's interesting about that, because I don't like Norman Mailer. I don't even like his fiction. I don't like his attitude about women. It's not my experience, and you know, not my fun. I like women. I think women that I like me. That's what's so fun about it. I don't like women as things I get to have. But what's interesting is that, oh, I lost that.
I'm gonna come right back to this. You know, you talk about Nancy Flores, and you know, just as you're talking here, I see this thread that's in Nancy Flores, that's in so many of the stories in Woodcut, and you certainly see in The Flowers, and that is the dichotomy between lustful, carnal sexuality and idealized love. You know, in the Nancy Flores, the protagonist is like she's this myth, and then you see her from the point of view of a guy who can't even remember her name.
Right.
And in some of the short the woodcut stories, you see this guy with these 2 girls, these 2 women, and he's trying to figure it out with them. And in The Flowers, you know, here he is. Sonny makes love regularly to Cindy, but it doesn't really mean all that much. And yet he's idolized Nika to the point where the whole story revolves around him saving her. So tell me about that dichotomy that's part of the human experience that you write so much about, the dichotomy between carnal sexuality and idealized love.
You know, the idealized love and carnal sexuality, it's funny, you know, is the carnal sexuality male? I say no. Why do I say that? Because I do know women. I've been graced with their carnal sexuality. I know women like men. I've had women that like me carnally. I like that. Who doesn't? But I like the whole interaction. I also know about idealizing wrongly, you know, all the various versions of that. And so, of course, you know, in The Flowers, people, oh, the women are weak. And I'm like, that is the oddest thing. I think all the women characters are much stronger. They're dealing with horrible jerks. I don't deny that, but the men are the losers. All the men are losers. They're really kind of guys that, you know, they're on a death path. They're going away. They aren't going to last. They are cliches. The women are dealing with realities and dealing and coping with them and coming to conclusions. The mother character I consider a very strong, forceful woman. Now Nika, in a certain sense, I mean, she's just the early version, an early version, but she makes a huge decision to leave. That is tremendously gutsy. Think about that. That was incredibly courageous of her. That Sonny, in his innocence, is trying to help her in all these ways, and in honorable ways that I consider honorable, although stupid too. Like one of the things he does, and not to give, he gives her this money he stole. Now, the truth is, that's really generous of him. It's also, she could get busted. All kinds of horrible consequences. What he is doing potentially to her, another novel could occur. That, somebody finds, this horrible stuff. But from his utter, sweet, generous, noble, that self in him, he does this for her. Also out of his own selfishness. That's what's great about it. People do things for noble reasons that are incredibly selfish. Because he had to get rid of the evidence. He didn't want that money around. He didn't know where to hide it. So he's got to get rid of it, and now he's got a person to get rid of it too. He looks good, and it's taken care of. Because he knows he has to go back and deal with his shit. But I consider her extremely strong, even as she's a human being, a very young woman who is making an extraordinary journey that, frankly, we see all the time going the other way. It's a version of the same huge, gutsy move that they're not men, they're boys and girls are coming across our border and taking huge risks. This happens to be a little different because she gets on a bus to go home. Where? Obviously, she has no family in the sense that she's leaving family, that isn't treating her well. I think a lot of times people want to misunderstand it because they've idealized in some naive way what they've left. Everybody wants, they've left their home. No. Have you ever been to one of those homes? I mean, some of the people, when they've left, they're ugly drunks, they're abusers, or they're utterly poor, they're stupid. They're, not necessarily in a way that they mean to be bad, they just are. And they moved up, and that's why they're here. It isn't because they've sacrificed the beautiful, quaint Mexico for this country. They actually moved away from a place that was extraordinarily hard with crime and drugs and all these things. And she is really good questions for you to have. You could have a whole creative writing course, varying versions of writers answering questions that Jason Rocha would ask.
Would ask.
What's that stuff called?
It's just powder.
Oh.
Okay, so we're rolling. So we were talking about the flowers, and one of the things that's important in the flowers, I think, is you've got all these diverse people, and I'm wondering, when you're talking about the strength of the women, which obviously I agree with you, they're very sympathetic and strong women and women trapped, and it's very true to the reality. Do you think that maybe it's the fact that we're watching them, or that we're observing this from the point of view of a male, that provokes people into thinking that there's not an understanding of it?
I do think.
In other words, if you were to have written it from the point of view of Cindy or Nika, what do you think? How do you think that story would play? Do you think that there'd be more sympathy to the fact that you in fact are dealing with these real issues of women?
Well, I think, am I dealing with the issues of women, and why from the point of view of the boy? And it's because I actually don't believe that. Look, I don't believe white people can be black. I think that's ridiculous. It's like and why is that? Why is it clearly so? It's because, would you allow a black person to write white? Never. That would be not even, the only way you could do it is if it's a comedy. It'd have to be a farce. But somehow you allow, the other way. I actually don't think a straight person should write as a gay man. I think that's odd. Not even accounting for the fact that why are you doing that? What is your goal? Except from...
What about, though, authors that, if you're trying to tell the whole story of the human race, aren't you limiting yourself as an author if you're only saying, I'm only going to write about, from the point of view of these males as opposed to point of view of this women or of young people or of old people or of, this is one of the problems I dealt with in my first collection of short stories is I wanted to get into different voices. And I was terrified because I don't know how to write for a 14-year-old girl. And yet I did it. I mean, I taught myself. I did my research. But doesn't that limit you?
Well, it does become limiting when you have to, if you're going to be inside the head of. I think if you're going to go omniscient in a certain sense, no, it's not limiting. I mean, you can do it because you're already obviously not omniscient. So we've already, we have a pretense that you are, but you aren't. You're reflecting the omniscience of your time. And that omniscience is not really what we mean. We mean a limited point of view. And so you have a limited point of view and we're all sort of in on that. I find, I love Annie Proulx. People point out that Annie Proulx writes from a man's point of view. I accept it. I understand that as an artifice. Do I think it's a man? No. No. I don't think she's got a man's point of view down. In the shipping news, I really don't. If you really analyze it, I don't think that's what a man is like. But once I get past it, I can understand the artifice. This is art, and I can go there. In the flowers, I just don't think I would be fair to Nika for me to write from the point of view of a 14-year-old Mexicanita that I really don't know that story. In my own life, I don't even know it. I think I could. It's not that I don't think I could know it. I would have to go and, I have to go to Mexico. I'd have to go to a village. I'd have to do a whole bunch of things that I think it can be done. I just don't, I can't do that. Now it's, physically impossible. I think there would be writers that could do that. If you had enough time and money to do that, so you can. But I can write from the point of view of a 15-year-old boy and who has met these 14-year-old. I have a whole span of women that I know from the point of view and of various points of view. And I know the insides of certain, of a wider perspective on certain women. That mother character is not my own mother, for instance. I mean, there's certain similarities of the 25 characteristics of that woman. Maybe she has 5 that my mother had, but that doesn't mean it was my mother. Now, do I have a, yeah, sure, it was a single mother. Yeah, I had, that's a big one, and that's why, because I don't have the father, mother. I don't write about that because I really don't know that life. I have no way, and I can't go back into that life. There's no way I physically can do it. So, no.
Getting into writing now, the first generation, we talked about this last night, the first generation of writers from any oppressed group, it's often literature of protest, declamaciones, the outrage, the anger, and then, if you're lucky, you get beyond that and get into a more refined examination of the human experience. Somehow you leapfrog. Somehow you forgot that part of it on the bus, and somehow you went directly to writing these stories that embody this chicanismo, if you will, but that do it through a much more universal prism and through a much more universal look at the human experience. How did you do that? How were you able to skip this experience? Because you certainly knew it, right? I mean, you read these guys.
Oh, why did I skip that protest era? I actually don't think I did. I mean, one fact that I think is not always in everybody's mind is that I didn't publish until much later. I mean, I didn't get an early acceptance. Everything was, and then there also during the era, I mean, I came up, I'm actually just on that first generation of that we could almost like the post-Vietnam, it was like I had to worry about being drafted. That was a big issue that transcended, communities. And that was a big one for me. And I thought about it a lot. I worked on, I went to the, the induction center. I went through all the exams. I went through it and I looked around and I'm like, oh my God, these are the dudes I'm going to Vietnam with. And, I was a pretty good athlete. And I'm like, oh my God. I don't know if I want to do this with these guys. If this is who's going, what's it like? I also came from a father who was a Marine and, these things like that. So he'd tell me things. Well, I came up in that protester. I read all that. But I did in some sense, like I said, I came up, I started going worse. I found that when I would go to, and I did do things, and that's a long story, mecha and things like that. Other things, because of my racial complexity, and then, I did not have that attitude too. Somebody give me shit, I fucking want to slap them around. You don't give me shit. I'm moving on. And I had those things sort of happen to me. But I moved to I started moving and I got to sort of serious, like, other political, I started moving to larger political issues and larger things. And I started, actually my first terrible novel, which is not going to ever be published, was very much what you're talking about a young Chicano who starts the riots in Isla Vista. It was a terribly, melodramatic, telenovela-esque, I could tell you every plot sequence where it was this one Chicano who kills his boss at a paper, he's a paper cutter and his girlfriend Susie is this, and this racist guy says this, so he beats the shit out of him and kills him. He has to run. He picks up a black guy hitchhiking. They end up in Isla Vista, and he starts the riot. That sort of really stupid stuff. It didn't get published, so I didn't get burdened.
Okay. Okay. So the moral is, write it. Just don't publish it.
Yeah, no, but I thought it was the greatest novel. That was the novel that I thought once they publish my stories, they will publish it. And then a few years later I read it and I go, oh my God, this is bad.
Well, let me ask you this. You write in English and in Spanish, the code switching. What do you favor the English and what's the decision?
Well, obviously I'm stronger in English and it would be ridiculous. Maybe at third grade, fourth grade reading ability, I don't even know. No, I'm actually better than that now, particularly. I can read pretty good newspapers and maybe I'm like seventh grade. And so it wouldn't even be there. Now, I have to say in the beginning, I didn't like a lot of what Chicanos were doing because every word, like, what do you need to say "sia" for? That's just stupid. You're just showing off. Showing off about a stupid word when you could say chair. Who cares? That doesn't tell me anything except that you're being pretentious. Just saying a word. You don't need this. You don't know, I went into the sala. What are you saying that for, man? Just say you went in the living room, all right? That's in every language has a word like that. Big deal.
But are there some words that...
Well, there are some words. There are a few words. Chale, there are certain words that you do that are specific. And yes, that you should do. You should do it if it's natural. If it really has to do with the natural. Now, I tend to be conservative. I'm a conservative writer. I have a rigid, I believe in and I think you should always be conservative. Because this other thing is just, the excess is kind of interesting for 5 minutes. And then it just gets ridiculous. It's just exhausting. So be conservative, and it's easier to be conservative. Now, I learned a lot more as a teacher. There'd be these people, I want to write in Spanish, why don't they read me in Spanish? Screw them, they should learn. Well, and I say, well, that's, you can live like that. It's your choice, but I guarantee you're not going to get published. I mean, is somebody in Maine and New York going to read you? I mean, I don't know if that's not an issue. I do believe we are in a business and you are trying to survive. I mean, you can go to a job and say, I can do this. And if you don't like it, too bad for you. Well, yeah, and they don't have to hire you.
But you're saying you could also limit yourself, limit your audience.
Yeah, I think you do limit, and I want to be. I'm actually myself. I actually know I like translated books. I have no trouble with translated books.
Let's talk for a moment about audience, though.
I try to write. I write and think, what would a person in Mexico want to know about? In my mind, I'm writing for people in Mexico. I'm writing for a time, and those people, when they come here, this is what, and I'm aware of that, and I think that can be translated easily. I don't really, because I'm conservative, it's not a really, I try to capture the voice, and I think it can be translated well enough, close enough that I don't find, I learned to read a few people, I read from Rulfo and certain people in Spanish, and, I think they've translated pretty good.
So would that therefore say that you should only write in English without having any?
No, I don't think that at all. I think you should try to capture. Look, it's sort of like you're going to have a scene. You're going to try to capture a phone conversation. You're not going to transcribe a real phone conversation. That's really boring. A real phone conversation transcript is not good. But the artifice, the pretense of reading a phone conversation is that you don't think it's an artifice. It looks real. People say, oh, you do a real, yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, I did that pretty good, didn't I? I really tricked you. Because I want you to think, oh, he just transcribed it. Well, that shows you how good I did. I'm pretty proud of myself. Because writing a phone conversation so it looks like a real phone conversation is much harder than a real transcription because it has to feel natural, which it isn't. And you should be able to use your language, your Spanish language, your little ways of saying in a way that doesn't interfere with the flow. People, in the most recent case, and there's many, but I'm thinking of Junot Díaz's book, people getting on Juno about, that to me is racist bullshit because he didn't do that. He's a pretty smart dude. And the Spanish he uses is not anything offensive. That is the vernacular of the streets. It is common to the way he's using and how he's using it. It was done flawlessly, perfect execution. And anybody who's criticizing, it's like certain people discussing the Constitution, like these people have a trip on their head, and it's not really what they're talking about. It's code word for something else.
Let me stop you just for a second. We're almost done. I
Yeah.
have 2 or 3 more questions. Tell me about your work schedule. I know that when you were doing construction, you had to fit it in, but now that you're teaching and stuff, tell me about your typical writing schedule.
My work schedule has gone through varying, phases because I have. When I began and I was working construction, I would often, first of all, I practically never wear my official hat when I was working. I kept, my biggest 90% of my writing was in a notebook. I'd write at least a page to 3 a day, just keeping track like, a captain's ledger, I would just, write down what happened today. And, every little conversation was my favorite thing, keeping notebooks. Since I've had this injury to my body that ended a 1.5 years ago, so I'm adjusting to that. But in those days when I didn't work, when I was in a job, I loved my boys and my family life. So it was really important for me to be with them and, not out of principle, but because I liked it. But, from 10 o'clock on till 1, I would write to 2. And if I were working and when they got to school, sometimes, they'd go to school and at 8 o'clock everybody's gone. From until about 11, 12, 1, I would do again. And those phases would go until I went to work. Then I got this phase. Teaching became much harder it was much harder than construction, to the degree that even though you have all this time, I've been inundated with all this yak, which I never had. You know, I never talked about writing to anybody. Nobody even knew I read a book. And so I was starved and would do, well, I would like, you know, I need a day away from it. You know, it's basically, let's watch The Simpsons, anything, get me out of here. So that was a phase. Now I'm in a new phase. And now I have what I consider ideal for me. I work in the morning. I get up, you know, between 8 and 9. And then for an hour, I'm doing quiet things. I used to write letters, emails, something, but now I don't even do that. I read the paper, I drink, and then I gradually work into the writing. You know, 11, 12, I look at emails, I spend an hour. Usually it's 1 or 2, and then I go and I have a break. I run around, do whatever I want, have my normal life. And I pick it up again at night, you know, 10 o'clock at night, 10:30, and I stay up till 1. And yeah, it's perfect now. The reading in the afternoon, sometimes I will read in the morning or I'll read at night, but basically I have the perfect setup now.
What about character development? I know that a lot of these are based on people that you know, or composites. Does it all flow, a character, or do you go back and tweak?
Oh no, I love what I love about computers. You know, I come from, I think you're familiar with the old days when it was typewriter, and you just, any change was like, oh God, I have to retype all this and it might not fit and all this. What I love is I go back, you know, a character's here and I get to, you know, the 12th page and I realize, oh, I need to, you know, foreshadow or whatever you call it. I need to add this here because it makes sense. If I bring this up here, I wonder if I, you know, stuff like that. And I love the computer because I can do that. And I keep stages of pieces I'm working on just for that. Who knows, like for the brilliant scholar of me that would come back and see how my process worked and see like draft Monday is like different from a draft 2 weeks later in these tiny little details of character description.
Speaking of that, so much of what you write about in these short stories, you know, it's almost like you take a microcosm. You take a scene between two people that takes place in 10 or 15 minutes, and you come at it from different angles and different prisms, and you layer it. And there's not, you know, as we've talked about before, there's text, there's subtext, there's metaphor, and you massage it. So in many ways, do you that old adage about it's not about writing, it's about rewriting. Is that how you get at some of these layers?
The rewriting, you know, it's funny, do I rewrite a lot? I think there are two, well, at least there's two ends of the spectrum. There's the huge draft rewrite, this is my 20th draft, and then there's the one that I'm like. And I think this is where the computer has facilitated huge amounts. I really can't write the next sentence until I'm satisfied with the first one, the one I'm preceding. And you know, if it's a sentence of 25 words, and of those combinations of words there are 50 possibilities, I have tried 47, and I have figured out what I consider the best one, and then I move. And so when I am done, pretty much I'm 95% in that range done when I've done my job. When I actually finally print out, it's very close. I do know those people that just like type as fast as they can, and I envy that, but because I am not. I'm so methodical. So every is this an or the? Everything is moved like a piece of rock.
When you write, you talk about experience teaches by surprise. And when you write a story, when you start a story, do you know where it's going to end? Are there times when you're writing and all of a sudden the story surprises you because of the way you realize, oh, this is how I have to end it?
Yeah, no, I do like that. I mean, that is my little thing that experience teaches by surprise, and yes, I at least the former me. It's the only reason that I would not do this. I always knew the end. Now that doesn't mean I wrote the end, because the writing of the end, when I get to it, is the biggest joy. I just know where it's gonna be. It's kind of like making love. You know, but you don't know exact details. And the exact feeling is much better than, even though you know you're going to get there, that's where you're aiming. And so you're having fun because you know you're going to get there, but it's the fun that you get to have to get there. And it's very much like I don't have a story. I usually have an end, and then I try to work it. Like, where did it begin? Where am I? Now, having said that, I'm moving a little differently now. I am working a little differently where I'm working off. It might not be the end. It might be this corner. And I'm moving. You know, things are changed in my own life, and I don't know what that is. I got away from short stories for a while, and maybe, I don't know. So I'm about to turn in a collection of stories, and you know, when I used to just write stories all the time, the fact of the matter is some of the stories weren't good. You don't see those, of course. You don't read those. You only read the ones that I let you read that I'm done with. But you don't know that I have stories that were not good. And I just wrote like recently 3 stories, and I realized like 1 I need to fix. 2, I don't even know if they're good. I might not know for another year, but I suspect 1 is not going to ever. And the other one, it could be a 10 or 15 minute fix that I just, it only needs this. And then I can fix it, but I can't see it now. Much as I see, I cannot tell. It's too fresh, whatever it is.
What's the longest it's taken you to write a story?
Oh God, yeah, lately, you know, I don't know if it's what it used to be. I used to be able to write a story sometimes in a week and a half or 2. But I suppose a month when I used to have kids. But you know, it's funny, in a certain sense, I really don't, I think you really only have.
Sorry about
No,
that. This is a thing that I tell everybody not to do.
Yeah. I think you really only have, oh my gosh, what were we talking about?
About how long it takes you to write a story. And you said that it used to take a few weeks or a month, but now that you...
Yeah, I forgot I had another point, and I completely blanked it. But now I'm, I know, I think you only have a few hours a day. It doesn't matter what your life is like. I don't think you have more than, you probably really only have 4 hours a day of real creative work, which is why, you know, when I was teaching was much harder, because a lot of times I would give it to the things I was reading and, you know, preparing, and then I got to my own, and I was like, the real interesting juice in me it needs to, you know, I need a sleep to put it to rest again. So, but I don't know now. I just wrote a story that took way too long, it seemed to me. I don't know if it was worth it. We'll see later. I just don't know, but you just have to go by I have to go by the cycle that I'm offered.
What do you think ideally, and this is our last question, what do you think ideally would be the lasting contribution that Latin American letters make on American literature?
What do the lasting contribution of Latin American literature? Well, I just think it's like all literature. It does help us because we've been so, our own culture has been so suppressed, and we are so excluded from canons that we look back and to read Juan Rulfo and to read Garcia Marquez, to see what's going on in Mexico and in Central America and stuff. That is so exciting, and it's liberating to see, look how smart we are and how much we produce. Our brothers that we didn't even know existed because they didn't tell us. So obviously it's going to have a huge impression on generations that, you know, around here in Texas that don't know. One of the things I'm doing with Centro Victoria in this center that we're doing. I'm hoping that as we do our little project, one of the things I want to do is to orient our community to, in this case, in beginning with Mexico, so that the Mexican writers know about us and that we learn about them. And I'm hoping that we I really think they don't like us as of now, because when they do read us, it's like, God, you guys are just into this silly stuff. I mean, what is this and what is that for? I mean, they read Shakespeare. They care about these larger. They aren't embarrassed to say they read Dostoevsky or Camus, or they have none of these troubles that we still have. When, oh no, I only read Chicano lit. They don't even know what you're talking about. Like, what? Why would you do that?
Okay, I think that's it. You did good.
That was something. You're doing good. I aside from me, I just think these are amazing.
Well, good. I mean, I think it's going to be. I'm looking to the future and just thinking, putting all this thing together, because I do want to do like Visions of Aztlan. I want to do Voices of Aztlan. And I'm just having done just like what 7 or 8.
Are they doing PBS in the? I they were doing that more, right?
Yeah, but Johnson used to play here at some point. No? For a while. Can I get a shot of this?
Sorry?
Can I get a shot of that?
Shiner?
No, a shot of the
Oh, of what?
of the counter there.
Which one?
I just want to look at this.
Oh, a shot.
A shot, like
We're
a.
asking for a shot to drink.
No.
Go through the tour probably.
Protecting myself with.
There's always that very East LA like tire shop over there too. Idealized. Well, yeah, you're just doing.